Welcome to this video on using shorthand in homeschooling. My objective is to give you all of the resources and knowledge that you'll need to affect the learning of shorthand in a homeschool environment. Here I've taken a couple of minutes to write out my title, Homeschooling Shorthand, both in longhand and in Gregg shorthand. Gregg shorthand is the shorthand that was most commonly used in the United States when shorthand was popular, and it's the shorthand that I will be focusing on in this video. It took me a little while to write this out, write homeschooling shorthand in longhand, because I had to make a lot of motions. HOMESCHOLING. So it took a little while. The Gregg, as you can see, is much shorter and quicker. I've got HOMSKULING shorthand. Okay, I'm going to next go into telling you a little bit of the who, what, where, why, how, and when of homeschooling shorthand. Okay, now I'm going to go over the classic questions that a journalist would ask when he was covering a news story. In other words, who, what, when, where, why, and how should we be teaching Gregg shorthand to homeschoolers? And I'm going to start off out of order with why, because I think that's the most critical one. If the answer to why isn't satisfactory, then you can just stop, and you need to address the other questions. So let's say why you might want to teach shorthand to a homeschool student. There's two primary reasons in today's world. One is note-taking. I demonstrated a little bit in the introductory sequence how Gregg shorthand was faster and more efficient than regular longhand. So it is very helpful in note-taking to get your ideas down quickly. The other major advantage is privacy. Very few people in today's world know how to read Gregg shorthand, so there is privacy in your notes. And that can happen both at an individual level for your own private notes, and if a family or if a small group of students learn shorthand, then they can also affect private communications between themselves by interchanging writings in shorthand that very few other people will be able to understand. So that is the why. Some of the reasons why not. The old reasons for taking shorthand were to transcribe speech, dictation for a secretary, to transcribe a speech that a politician was giving, for reporters to transcribe verbal interactions that were occurring. Nowadays, we can do that with our cell phones, with various audio recording devices. So that is really not as useful anymore. And it's actually a whole different skill set that's used to transcribe speech. This teaching methodology that I'm going to be speaking to you about is not effective for transcribing speech, and in fact it's oriented towards a different skill set. It's taught differently. So if your objective is to enable somebody to take dictation, my talks on homeschooling for shorthand will not be what you want. Mine are going to be oriented towards these types of objectives. So that is the why, and now I think I'm going to go on to the when. So we can keep filming this. I'm just going to check off why, and let's talk a little bit about when. So I will modify my board here. So let's see, can we get a video of the board while it's laying down flat like this? Okay. When the important question is, when in the student's development do you want to introduce shorthand? And shorthand has some advantages. You probably saw during the opening sequence that I was spelling things out phonetically and not putting in all the extra letters that were in the word homeschooling, for instance. That has many advantages. It's much more logical than our regular English, but it could pose some problems too. So I am going to suggest that shorthand be initiated after the student has a good grasp of spelling, of conventional spelling. So after conventional, spelling is mastered. The reason for this is spelling in Greg is much easier and it's much more logical. It's much easier to learn. So if you learn the Greg first or before the other is mastered, it's likely to be much more difficult to master conventional spelling. And that conventional spelling is what you're going to need to communicate with others in the world, because it's not realistic to think that very many other people are going to learn Greg shorthand, even though it is logical and quicker and more efficient than regular longhand. So this will put a substantial delay in teaching shorthand. Yes, a child could pick it up very early, but it's questionable whether that's wise, because it may interfere with some other essential learnings. So that's the first key on when. Another element on when. In order to be effective and for the learnings to be retained, the Greg shorthand is going to have to be used, and used on a regular basis. So the second item for when the student is engaged is when they have an ongoing need to take notes. So these are the two criteria on when you're going to introduce, or when I recommend introducing a student to Greg shorthand. The second one, my guess is that's probably going to come in around 9th or 10th grade, when the student is, or the homeschool student is watching videos or seeing other content and they have to take notes. I believe it's best to wait until this point, because then they will actively use the Greg shorthand. And this is where much of the learning and development is going to occur, is during the actual use of the shorthand. So that's my recommendation. Again, it'll vary from student to student, so I haven't told you a specific time. I've suggested some, but you're going to have to look at the development of your own particular student and think about where they are in relationship to these two factors, and if they're ready to begin the study of Greg shorthand. Okay, let's go on to who. And there are a couple of things I want to address with the people involved. There are two ways of doing this, two major approaches. One is going to be self-directed, where the student is largely going to pick this material up by themselves and of their own initiative. The parent may in fact not know shorthand and may not have time to develop the skill themselves. In that case, the student is going to be pretty much on their own in terms of covering the material and assessing their achievement and progressing themselves through. There can be some monitoring done. For instance, the student could be given a task to write something and then read it back from their Greg shorthand. So the teacher or the parent wouldn't necessarily have to know shorthand themselves to see that a certain level of skill had been achieved. So the second who who option is this could be taught by a teacher, or for instance, the homeschooling parent and the student could learn shorthand together at the same time. In either case, the monitoring individual is going to have a little bit different relationship in the second one, where they themselves are learning the material, or they already know the material. So those are two different options. They're both viable, and you just need to think a little bit prior to starting which one that you want to go with. So that's our who. Related to that, there are a couple of options on where. So I'm going to check off who, and let's start to address where. So I'll check that one off too. And now I'm going to lay this down so I can do a little bit of writing on it, and we'll consider a couple of where options. And I'm going to say that the two options are in a class and alone. So it's conceivable, if you are part of a homeschooling group, that you may want to have a shorthand class. And there could be a number of homeschooled students that are ready to address the study of shorthand, and they could be taught together in a class, and they could interact. There's a lot of benefits to that. They can try to read each other's shorthand. They can write notes to each other and have that interactive component going. They can also gauge their progress against other people. They can see what's working for some people, what might not be working as well for other people, so they can kind of learn best practices from each other. So some advantages to a class. Many times that's not going to be possible, and so studying alone is another option too. That's I taught myself shorthand alone because that was the option that I had, and I think many of you are going to be in the same boat. So give a little thought to that, explore those two options, and determine which you would like. And then I'm going to pause for a moment, and then we'll address the final two what and how questions. This is the final segment in the video, and we're going to address the final two journalistic questions, what and how. So what we're going to be teaching is Gregg shorthand. This is a unique skill. It really makes a person stand out in today's world to be able to demonstrate this skill and to show that they have it. It gives you privacy advantages. It gives you the ability to take notes very quickly, which is helpful in the college environment or in the professional life. So it's a valuable skill that is still available in today's world, even though it's rarely taught. So that's the what. We've covered a little bit about that what as we've gone through here. How? I am creating a document, and that document will be linked at the place you found this video. So you can go and pull up this document, and it will have outlines on lessons and basically a curriculum for shorthand. It will have links to many of my other video presentations. So from that basic document as a map, you can link to one video or the next video for the students' individual lessons. I'll also have links to other textual materials that you want to use, or worksheets, etc. I plan to keep this document up to date. So this video I'm going to produce once, but this document I will, as I produce new materials, keep modified and up to date. So whenever you go back and pull it up, you should be able to get the latest and greatest. And that should provide you with everything you need to implement the homeschooling curriculum within your homeschooling environment. So thank you for listening, and good luck with learning Gregg shorthand.